Fantastic. It was great. Thanks for being here. I'm glad I made it. The blizzard, fortunately, wasn't an impediment for us getting here. So yeah, I'm from Cofide. I'm the founder. I was previously at a company called JetStack. Later joined Venafi. We've got teams. Some of our members on our team are from the likes of Cisco and Isovalent. So we're people that have been in the cloud native ecosystem for a long time. What I'm going to talk to you today about is, funnily enough, agentic identity, but I'm actually going to focus a bit more on open standards. I think a number of those standards have been mentioned throughout the day, and I'm going to try and draw some more attention to them, work out kind of where I guess they fit, but also some of the challenges of agentic systems that are presenting themselves, which mean that we need to be able to evolve those standards. And there's a lot of ongoing work at the moment. These things don't often go quickly, as anyone knows, if they worked with a standards body, but there's definitely great work going on. And I want to just sort of draw some attention to that and trying to work out, really explain to you what we're doing in this space and what we can already provide today, pretty much. So I think we'd all agree we've sort of got a bit of an NHAI crisis, effectively. We are now at the moment really just spraying and sprawling like identity credentials, which really are not identities in themselves. It's a bit of a misnomer. They quite often do not encode actual identity. They are proving really the possession of a secret. A secret that's been created and distributed. It's often shared, it's not governed. These are all the things that we're seeing in the wild. And I think they're even worse, of course, now that we've got agentic systems that are proliferating. What we have at the moment, bearer tokens, they're manually rotated quite often, they're forgotten about, they're not governed. And I think the important thing is they don't have any binding to the workload context. So quite often when, a system presents a token, yes, it has possession of it, but you don't actually know the context of that. You don't know the context of the workload, the runtime context. And that, of course, makes it incredibly difficult to do very effective access control. So what do we really need if we were sort of like to think about the target state and where we really should be moving? We want like cryptographically bound proofs of identity. That's incredibly important. And we want to make sure that it's short-lived as much as possible. Rather than actually providing really long lifetimes, we want to make sure that it's short-lived and it's regularly rotated, it's automatically rotated. And we want to build this on the foundations that we already have quite often in cloud environments and on-prem environments, where there is the so-called bottom turtle. We can rely on, for instance, a TPM, and we can attest a TPM. We can attest the provenance of a machine in a cloud environment. These are all things that we actually have available today, but quite often we don't take advantage of them. We don't really effectively use them. Why? Because there's friction. It's more difficult, perhaps, than a developer basically issuing an API token, putting it in their code and shipping it. And that's really when we kind of want to get to. Identity is a misnomer here. Quite often we do not have identity at all. Agents really changed the game. I think there's been some great presentations today which have talked about the challenges, and I'm sure there's going to be more challenges ahead. They are really, though, when you think about it, like workloads. I've built a variety of agents to do things inside our own organization, and also on behalf of some of our partners. And effectively, when you write an agent, it is code. If you go ahead and write one, it's some Python, it's some TypeScript, or all manner of other different languages. And actually, some of the very simplest agents are just a few lines of code. So in some of those senses, and you ship them in a container, you ship them in a VM, you ship them in a serverless function. So in some respects, they are quite like a workload. However, it's the really special characteristics, I guess, that we've learned today, the unique characteristics that make them incredibly difficult, particularly with IAM in mind. And I think, again, I'm probably reiterating, I think, what you've probably heard today, but just to stress the point, I think the non-determinism is one of the most important sort of challenges here. Before we could understand what a workload was going to do, pretty much, we could put some guardrails around it. We understand what it needs to do, the access permissions that are needed. Go ahead and create those. Well, with agents, they have actually a really special property, which is agency. So we can give them intent, and we can tell them what we want to achieve. And the great thing about the agent is it will go ahead and do it, right? It will work by itself, it will work with other agents. And that is the really special property, I think, is actually something that we want to embrace, of course. But it also creates challenges in trying to put a guardrail around it, because you really just don't know kind of what the agent is going to do. And if you've ever used these in your IDE, you'll realize it does some pretty crazy things at times that you wouldn't have done yourself. But actually, sometimes it achieves the right outcome, of course. It's goal-oriented, which is important. It's cross-domain. So I think this is kind of important. It's not just operating quite often within your own environment, but it's actually probably reaching out to other environments, other trust domains. And I think that creates a huge amount of challenge too. And there's the fact that it also has, autonomy. Yeah, it's semi-autonomous or autonomous, but quite often there is a user, there's a human, right, that is sometimes initiated, certainly at the moment anyway. And I think the important point I think has been made today, here really attribution matters. Ultimately, an organization, an enterprise needs to understand what it was that triggered this agent to take that action at a point in time. And so really what I want to look at is like the open standards that we have, the tools in the toolbox, right, that we have today. And I'm talking about here standards that are open. They're published and they're ratified in some cases. So I'm just going to go do, in the space of a few minutes, a bit of a sort of fly-by tour, I guess, of some of those standards and some of the, I guess, where the gaps are, because admittedly, some of these standards work really well. And actually, there are some aspects to them that we're not using today that we probably should be using. I think the previous speaker outlined some of those things. There's some great things in OAuth that are not being practiced today that probably could be and should be used. But there's also some interesting work going on in some other working groups that you might want to be aware of. You can go ahead and join, you can contribute to if you're not already. One of which we're very close to. So we are very close to the Spiffy project. I think it was mentioned here earlier today. Typically a standard set of APIs, a standard for workload identity. So that's providing cryptographic identity to workloads, be it virtual machines, containers, particularly used in the cloud native ecosystem. So if you've ever spun up a pod in Kubernetes, or you've tried to use something in a service mesh like Istio, Spiffy is kind of that standard behind the scenes, right, that's providing that identity. And so we're going to talk more about this because this is like the foundational layer that actually you can use for agentic workloads. There's also a kind of working group in the IETF called Whimsy. I had to write there what it was for so I could remember, which is workload identity for multi-system systems environment. Sorry. And so the idea here is to be able to take the good work that's going on in Spiffy in the cloud native world, to take the work that's already been going on and is evolving in the OAuth ecosystem and bring it together and basically trying to coalesce it into a set of standards that are ratified by the IETF. And there's some great work going on there. I'll talk a little bit more about it. And finally, we've got OAuth and OADC, which I'm sure we're all are particularly aware of. Just really 1 or 2 minutes on Spiffy. A show of hands, maybe actually. Who here has heard of Spiffy? Just before I. Great. So a few hands, which is great. So this really provides a sort of a foundational layer, if you like, for providing, as I said, cryptographic identity via something like an X509 certificate or a JOT token to a running workload. If you're using Kubernetes today, you'll most likely be using something like this. You may not know it, but behind the scenes on something like an Istio mesh is Spiffy. And so indeed, it's actually being embraced by some of the cloud providers. So if you use some Google services today, it is also backed by Spiffy behind the scenes. Now, what are its special features? It provides platform attestation. So the idea is you can get to use all of those methods of attestation that already exist in the cloud today. You can prove whether a virtual machine is authentic. You can go to the cloud provider and prove that. Or you can ask a TPM in a kind of hardware machine. That's what we're doing with a number of our partners who are trying to secure their workloads in data centers. And you can use that effectively as your bottom turtle. And then you can issue out, on demand, workload identity to actual applications. So if you're trying to deploy your code like an agent, your agent will get given one of these short-lived rotated tokens. It's got a kind of, as I said, a life cycle attached to it. One of the great things about the Spiffy spec, and I won't go into the detail of it, but there's a whole manner of things which are really useful. One of which is a Spiffy ID. So this is like the encoding of the identity in the actual credential. So unlike a lot of traditional NHAIs that we use today, where you don't really understand the identity or you have no context of the identity, here you do. So you can understand in the ID, in the credential, exactly what this workload is. Proof, you know what it is. And then you can use that to basically apply authorization. So you've now got the ability to do very fine-grained authorization. I think that's a really important point here. So how do we take this, though, and apply it to the real world? Because certainly a number of the partners we're working with, they look at Spiffy and think, that seems like a pretty good solution for workloads. I need that. I haven't got that at the moment. That's a good replacement for the existing NHIs, which I know are inherently risky. But ultimately, though, I need to be able to access real-world resources. Now, I need my agent to go out and talk to a system that's OAuth protected, in the enterprise, an API a database, some SaaS. And so the challenge becomes like, how do you take the workload identity and then effectively do that delegation, right? Provide a credential that can be used at that backend system. And so fortunately, there are ways to do this in sort of the existing standards landscape today. You can use token exchange. I think it's been mentioned a few times already. Again, not something that's commonly used perhaps as much as it could be, but there's a bunch of RFCs. Come and talk to me afterwards if you want to go into the detail of some of these. But needless to say, you can actually exchange one type of token, as you'd expect, for another. But what's very, very useful about that is you can now start effectively scoping the token appropriately. And this is really important when you move to agentic workloads, where you want to make sure that you're not giving them broad scopes and broad permissions, that of the user that the user may have, but actually refining it down to something that's really needed to do the job. And you can do that on demand. So you can do that every time the agent has determined its tool use, its action, it's done effectively at runtime, pretty much. And so there's a bunch of standards there that already enable you to do that. So you're taking the agent's identity, you're doing the exchange, and then you're actually using that token to do the authentication and the authorization. There are loads of emerging standards in this space. Again, if this is something of interest to you, please come and tell us. I've got 1 minute, so I'm going to speed through. But yeah, if some of this is of interest, please come and talk to us. I think one of the important aspects, I think, that is certainly a challenge and that I think a lot of people are trying to think about at the moment is how to think about intent. That's really important, which is, how do you understand the user's intent, the original user's intent, and then the inferred agent intent as well? So once the agent is determined what it wants to go do, how do you represent that? And ideally, how do you do that cryptographically? And there are ways to do that. And I think, happy to connect with people who are interested in some of this. If you don't want to pour through all of these RFCs and implement yourselves, and to be honest, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to do that, you can come speak to us. This is what we're building effectively. We're taking all of the open standards, those existing standards, and the more emerging standards that we contribute to, and we're providing a turnkey platform that enables you to deploy workloads, regardless of whether they're kind of vanilla workloads, existing ones that you've got at the moment, which are much more deterministic, or some of these more agentic workloads. And we can transparently provide the credentials that are needed on demand, just in time, effectively. So the idea being here is that you've got the ability to secure every workload, every AI agent. This is how we approach the problem. I probably won't go into too much detail now, given the time, but if you're interested in what we're doing, how we're doing it, and you want to help, you can come join us and let me know. And I think that's the takeaway there, which I think maybe just in summary, I think NHAI is certainly an incredibly hard challenge, even without agents. Agents are now presenting this extra challenge. I think a number of the standards that exist are going to give us a good opportunity to be able to embrace some of those. Spiffy, Whimsy, Oath, I've mentioned them in a very fly-by tour. If you want to know more, come and find us. We're building a system for this, and we've got this available and in use now with a number of partners already. So thanks, everyone, and look forward to questions maybe after and catching up with you at the event. Thank you.